Thank you to Professor Abel and Bekshu and Jones for having invited me to speak here today. And many thanks to all of you for being here. I am going to read today from a longer essay. So what I read today is an excerpt from a longer essay, and I'd like to say a few things about that essay first. As Professor Abel just said, a few years ago I co-authored this book with Antonio Negri called In Praise of the Common. Usually when you publish something, a few months later, a few years later, you just go back to it and think, what did I do wrong, or what could have been done better, or what was yet to be thought there, and so on. And so the essay from which I'm reading now is an attempt to go back to the project and rethink some of its problems and issues, but specifically rethinking the concept of the common. So that's the context of the essay. Before I start to read, let me define right away what I mean by the common in my work. It will become clearer, hopefully, during the talk itself, but for the moment, let me simply say that by the common, I mean thought, language, and affect. So this is, if you will, a human common, thought, language, and affect in the widest possible senses, and hence also knowledge, since I believe that there is no form of knowledge that can do without thought, language, affect. Now, I know very well that there is another, there are several other usages of this term, the common, or sometimes the commons, depending on the context. Historically and otherwise, there have been many uses. One of the other uses is the commons intended as something that one could call, say, natural resources, air, oil, water, and so on. So I want to specify that that's not what I'm talking about when I talk about the common. I'm talking about this other common, which is thought, language, affect, knowledge. Now, the two are certainly related, but I think that it's important to conceptualize them first in separation before talking about them together, which is why I focus on one here right now. It is important to separate them because they function according to different logics. The common intended as natural resources, let's say, for lack of a better term, primarily functions according to a logic of scarcity, a logic of depletion. There is a finite amount of oil and that much water and so on and so forth. Whereas the common that I'm talking about, thought, language, affect, knowledge, functions according to a logic of excess, according to a logic of surplus. There's always more language produced by language. Thoughts proliferate more thoughts. As long as there are human beings around, then these things that I'm calling thought, language, affect, and hence knowledge are actually have a surplus effect. There isn't a problem of scarcity, there is a problem of, if anything, a problem of surplus. So these are two different logics, and hence at first one has to, I think, conceptualize them differently. And this is important politically also, not just philosophically, because clearly the kind of politics that would want to reclaim the common intended as natural resources, a common that functions according to a logic of scarcity, that kind of politics needs to be thought differently for a common, a politics that wants to reclaim a common that is functioning according to a logic of excess and surplus. So there are philosophical as well as political reasons for making the division first before relating them in any way. So now I will read for about 40 to 45 minutes. Universalism of the common. I begin with an epigraph. Quote, "Humankind sets itself only such tasks as it is able to solve. since closer examination will always show that the problem itself arises only when the material conditions for its solution are already present, or at least in the course of formation. End of quote. Karl Marx. 1. The concept of the common. What is the function of a concept? In considering the common as a political philosophical concept, I find it useful to begin from an answer Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari give to this question in their last collaborative work, What is Philosophy? There they write, quote, all concepts are connected to problems, without which they would have no meaning, and which can themselves only be isolated or understood as their solution emerges. End of quote. The function of a concept becomes intelligible in terms of this triangulation: concept, problem, solution. As articulated by Deleuze and Guattari, this triangulation has several implications. First of all, a simultaneity of problem and solution is being posited here. A problem comes into being and can be formulated as such only to the extent to which its solution is already in process, unfolding, surfacing, in short, already present in however indeterminate a form. Secondly, a concept is related essentially and necessarily to this simultaneous double emergence of problem and solution. Both its existence and its raison d'être are at stake and never cease to depend on such an emergence, which is to say that a concept is the effect or byproduct of mutually determined relations between problem and solution. Thirdly, the function of a concept thus can only be a double function of coadjutant. Its function, as it were, has two faces. One turned towards its problem, and the other turned towards its solution. A concept may help at once A, imposing a problem adequately, and B, in articulating a solution distinctly. The concept, hence, is crucial in constituting the double emergence of problem and solution. At once cause and effect, the concept reveals that the triangulation of concept, problem, solution functions according to immanent causality. What is then the function of the concept of the common? Of what exactly is the concept of the common, the cause-effect? If a concept is meaningless and lifeless outside of its triangulation, what is the triangulation that appertains and gives life to the concept of the common? The concept of the common finds its proper triangulation in both modernity and postmodernity in relation to the Marxist antagonistic dyad of capital and labor, or more precisely, of surplus value and labor power. To be short, the concept of the common has an ancient history that has its roots deep in the Aristotelian and scholastic philosophical traditions, that undergoes momentous reformulations in the early modern era, especially in Baruch Spinoza's thought, and hence well precedes Marx in his theorization of capital-labor relations. The function of a concept, however, may change considerably even as its structure may remain largely unaltered. The same concept may find its proper discursive home in a number of different translations over the course of time. In our present historical conjuncture, the cause-effect function of the common consists at once imposing the problem of capitalism as production of surplus value, and in articulating the solution of labor power as distinct yet indiscernible from such a process of production in philosophically adequate and politically effective manners. Let us begin with the problem. The concept of the common helps us understand clearly the specific difference of the contemporary, qualitatively dominant, now fully global and tendentially universal third phase of the capitalist mode of production. If the first and second phases may be characterized as mercantile capitalism and industrial capitalism respectively, our third phase has been given many useful names, each highlighting one or more of its prominent aspects, such as, among others, late capitalism, flexible capitalism, postmodern capitalism, global capitalism, cognitive capitalism, post-Fordist capitalism, real subsumption of society under capital, biopolitical production, or biocapital tout court, and most recently even casino capitalism. For my purposes, however, this third phase is best understood and defined as communicative capitalism, a term which was first coined by J. Dean and which I use in a somewhat different way. All these three phases can be called capitalism, since they all share in the production of surplus value. Each of these phases, however, produces surplus value in different ways, which is what the adjectives mercantile, industrial, and communicative signify. Obviously, these three modalities of capitalism are not necessarily mutually exclusive with one another, and are often complementary, and are now fully cumulative. Communicative capitalism produces surplus value primarily through communication, and especially through the communication of thought, language, and affect, and hence also of that assemblage of thought, language, and affect, which is knowledge, in all of their myriad forms. This is to say that in communicative capitalism, the initial raw materials, the final products, as well as the process of production itself, that is, beginning, middle, and end, are all, by definition, common. There is no such a thing as a solitary thought, as an individual language, as a personal affect, or as private knowledge, even though we may experience all of the above as that which is most intimate and most unique about ourselves. And hence, to express oneself intellectually, linguistically, affectively, is to activate and mobilize exquisitely shared, collective, common capacities. In communication, everything is common. Its potentialities, its actualities, as well as the processes that continuously turn the former into the latter. It is in this sense that the concept of the common helps us pose the problem adequately. The function of the common relative to its problem is that it enables us to understand, define, and name the current mode of production as communicative capitalism. Such is the problem. What and where is its solution? Among the merits of Deleuze-Guattari's formulation is its non-utopian character. If the problem can be at all conceptualized, that means that its solution is already conceptualizable and actualizable here and now, as Marx also emphasizes in the passage that I quoted at the beginning of this lecture. The solution to the problem does not exist in some other transcendent spatio-temporal realm. As I pointed out earlier, after all, the triangulation of concept, problem, solution functions according to immanent causality. This means, however, that both solution and problem come into being and share in the same plane of immanence. They are part and parcel of one another to begin with, and hence that it may be very difficult at times to differentiate between them. This is why earlier I also stated that if the first function of a concept is to pose a problem adequately, its second function is to articulate a solution distinctly, namely to posit a clear distinction between solution and problem as they emerge simultaneously and immanently. The function of the common relative to its solution, thus, is to enable us to distinguish between capital and labor, between surplus value and labor power, within a process of production that is driven by intellectual, linguistic, and affective communication. For this crucial distinction to become at all intelligible, it is necessary to conceptualize the common as having two irreducible yet immanent aspects, a potential and an actual aspect. If our current phase of the capitalist mode of production is driven by communication of that which is common, thought, language, affect, knowledge, then it follows that there can be no difference of any kind between capitalism and the common. If the common is considered only in its actual aspects, for example, as actual producers or as actual products, then capitalism and the common are absolutely indistinguishable from one another. As producing products of the common, today we are capitalism. matters begin to look differently if the common is considered from the standpoint of its potential aspect. Potentiality, on the one hand, is always embedded and incorporated in that which is fully actual, and hence nowadays is always fully within capitalism, and on the other hand, is not of capitalism and does not belong to capitalism in and of itself. Moreover, potentiality qua potentiality does not belong to anything or anybody, and in fact cannot be conceptualized in terms of property, whether private or public. Potentiality, rather, is common. There is a privileged essential relation between potentiality and the common, in the sense that if the common partakes both of actuality and potentiality, potentiality can only be shared and in common. Potentiality constitutes our common substance. The common in its potential aspect nowadays is nothing other than the assemblage of those capacities that do not belong to anyone in which we all share. Linguistic faculty, intellectual powers, as well as the capability to affect and to be affected, and hence the capacity for knowledge. But this is nothing other than labor power itself, which Marx defines famously in Capital Volume 1 as, quote, the aggregate of those mental and physical capabilities existing in the physical form, the living personality of a human being, end of quote. Labor power is the name Marx gives to human potentiality under capital. And, as I've argued, potentiality is always common. After all, as Marx also shows in Capital, that aggregate of potentialities which is labor power, and which is incorporated in a specific human being, is itself the product of social cooperation, is itself part and parcel of a collective power of production in the first place. In short, the function of the common relative to its solution is twofold. One, to make explicit something that had been implicit in Marx's definition all along, namely that his momentous discovery, i.e. the concept of labor power, makes sense only as a concept of the common, that our capacity to produce and reproduce ourselves and the world we live in, indeed our ability to become different from what we are, is shared, collective, and common. Two, to show distinctly that even though labor power intended as our common transformative capacity is activated by capital and is actualized in capital, there is nothing inherently and essentially capitalist about such a capacity per se, and that hence it may be put to work for and actualized in forms other than the form of value. A crucial corollary of all of the above is that the common is also a biopolitical concept. This is not the place to retrace the complex intellectual genealogies of the term biopolitics, which was first coined by Michel Foucault in 1974, and which has been interpreted, developed, and used in remarkably different ways since its inception. For my purposes, what I find most compelling is the critical re-elaboration of biopolitics that has been undertaken during the past couple of decades by a group of thinkers, such as, among others, Michael Hart, Antonio Negri, Paolo Virno, who in effect have brought to the foreground, as well as pushed to its logical conclusions, an insight that at best had remained implicit and latent in Foucault. This insight concerns the necessary and symbiotic relations between, on the one hand, biopolitics understood as a complex assemblage of modern technologies of power for the direct management, organization, and domination of life in all its forms, and, on the other hand, capitalism understood as a complex assemblage of modern technologies of production for the management, organization, and exploitation of labor power in all its modalities. Virno, in particular, expresses such an insight in a succinct and powerful thesis. Quote, biopolitics is merely an effect, a reverberation, or in fact one articulation of the primary fact, both historical and philosophical, which consists of the commerce of potential as potential, end of quote. Such a commerce of potential as potential, of course, is the defining feature of the exchange between capitalist and worker, inasmuch as what is exchanged there is labor power, which, as I mentioned earlier, is defined by Marx as the aggregate of all mental and physical potentials inseparable from the living body of the worker. Looking at the question of biopolitics through the filter of Marx's definition of labor power, thus, Virno asserts, and I quote, capitalists are interested in the life of the worker, in the body of the worker, only for an indirect reason. This life, this body, are what contains the faculty, the potential, the dynamis, namely labor power, as the aggregate of the most diverse human faculties. Life lies at the center of politics when the prize to be won is labor power. For this reason and this reason alone, it is legitimate to talk about biopolitics. End of quote. This last sentence, quote, for this reason and this reason alone, it is legitimate to talk about biopolitics, end of quote, constitutes Virno's implicit yet pointed rejoinder to those thinkers, especially Giorgio Agamben and perhaps even more so Roberto Esposito, who wish to discuss biopolitics without any substantive engagement with the history of capitalism. Indeed, Virno's contention is that it is highly mystifying to speak of biopolitics without understanding capitalist exchange relations as the historical and philosophical conditional possibility of any biopolitics whatever. And this is a contention that I would endorse. My point, in any case, has been to show that to the extent to which capitalism is the precondition for biopolitics, and to the extent to which labor power needs to be conceived as a concept of the common, namely as a shared, collective, common potentials for production and reproduction, to that extent, the common is precisely a biopolitical concept. Indeed, in this sense, the common is the biopolitical prize par excellence. Two, a universalism for the common. Human beings have nothing essentially in common. Human beings do not share in essences or identities, however defined. Human beings, however, do share in labor power, that is, in a collective assemblage of common transformative capacities, none of which constitute actual essences. Human beings share common potentials, which is why they may also share common projects. It is on this basis, and on this basis alone, common potentials and common projects, that it is at all possible to speak of a common humanity. And a common humanity is precisely not the human community. The politics appertaining to the concept of the common demands that we reclaim and reformulate in non-essentialist terms such pernicious, long discredited, yet still fully operative categories such as humanity, human nature, universalism, and so on. The politics of the common demands a new theory and a new practice of universal notions, and indeed a new type of universalism altogether, a universalism of common potentials and common projects. There are plenty of good reasons, of course, to mistrust universalism, as we have learned by many intellectuals of the stature, say, of Samir Amin, just to mention one of the most vocal critics of that universalism that goes by the name of Eurocentrism. Universalism has constituted and continues to constitute, in fact, possibly the most effective ideological weapon of that history, which has been the hallmark of modernity and postmodernity alike, and about which G.W.F. Hegel could say late in life that it is no more than, quote, the slaughter bench upon which the happiness of peoples, the wisdom of states, and the virtues of individuals are victimized, end of quote. And Hegel is indeed relevant here. The universalism in question, in fact, has manifested itself primarily in two dominant forms. a Hegelian one and a Kantian one. Hegelian forms of universalism function according to synthesizable contradictions and determine the identity of the totality, say for example Europe, by means of a relative and recuperative negation of all that is perceived as not sharing in the essence of the totality. So Hegelian universalisms selectively sublate the different into the identical, turn the different into the identical and homogenize it as part of the essence of the totality. Such Hegelian universalisms find their complement in those Kantian universalisms which function instead according to dynamic and non-synthesizable antinomies, and which determine the identity of the totality, again, for example, Europe, by means of a relative yet non-recuperative negation of all that is perceived as not sharing in the essence of the totality. Kantian universalism selectively excise the different from the identical, get rid of that which is perceived as different in order to construct an identity, the identity of the totality. If the most dangerous political manifestations of the former amount to total assimilation, integration, and domestication, the most dangerous political manifestations of the latter amount to complete ostracism and extermination. Both, therefore, lead to the same end, the erasure of difference. This, of course, is a well-known story. My point here is, above all, that both types of universalism, whether dialectical and cooptative, Hegelian, or antinomial and obliterative, Kantian, both destroy difference twice over. In order either to sublate it into identity or to excise it from identity, they need to posit difference as secondary, relational, and relative, rather than as primary, non-relational, and absolute. That is, they must conceive of the different as different from something, or even as different from itself, rather than as different per se. In shorter, rather than as singularity. These two universalism and their variants turn the absolutely singular into the relatively different, so as to destroy the latter by opposing it to the identical, either dialectically or antinomially. To put it another way, both universalisms destroy singularity at once by relativizing it as difference and by negating difference through identity. This is to say that the real target of such universalisms is not difference, but absolute difference, that is, singularity. And it is the case, though it would take me further afield to substantiate this here, the singularity constitutes such a target because it has a privileged and essential relation to the common. That the dialectical binary of identity and difference obscures precisely the complementary dyad of the singular and the common. It is in this sense that capitalism needs to be understood as a universalism in its own right, as the universalism of value. Capitalism owes much of its success, ideologically and otherwise, to the fact that it has effected an ambitious integration of the two aforementioned distinct yet related forms of universalism, thereby producing a complex ideological war machine that is all the more effective for being completely self-contradictory. Many of the political attempts to counter such a Janus-headed war machine have perceived and hence attacked only one of its aspects, thereby falling prey all the more easily to the other aspect and hence failing in the end. Some of the most recurrent among these failed, or at best very limited, attempts consist of the various political impasses reached when redeploying in whatever way binaries such as identity and difference, or the private and the public. Binaries whose foundation has been an idealist and universalist concept of human essence all along, and whose function has been at once to exploit and to foreclose all that is neither private nor public, neither identical nor different, namely the common itself. Put differently, one cannot fight the universalism of value effectively by brandishing either side of these binaries, or even both sides at once, because such binaries function precisely according to the relativizing logic of equivalence, according to the law of value. If we have any hope to defeat such lethal universalisms based on shared essences, on shared identities, and on value, we need to steep the politics of the common in a universalism based on common potentials and common projects. It is precisely because capitalism shows more than ever today its true universalist colors that we need to respond in kind with universalist aspirations of our own. If we are to oppose and to change a system that brings us together only to the extent to which it tears us apart, it is necessary that we posit and affirm a universalism of the common. Three, communism as a universalism of the common. If I conclude this lecture by saying that such a universalism of the common bears the name of communism, you may think that I've been treating the common as no more than a Trojan horse whose secret content can now finally come out, reveal itself, and wage war. You may think that the common and its universalism have been here no more than a pretext for re-exhuming communism yet again, for bringing it back to life in a different guise. And if that is what you think, you may well be right. But only in part. In calling the universalism of the common communism, in fact, I mean to suggest above all that communism needs to be thought in terms of the common and of its universalism. And hence that communism needs to be rethought as a universalism of common potentials and common projects. I am sure I don't need to point out, after all, that only too often communism has not constituted such a universalism, that only too often communism has been conceptualized and put into practice instead as a variation on that universalism of value which separates the common from itself and from its forms. See most emblematically that staggering betrayal of communism that was the Soviet experiment, which Vladimir Lenin himself approvingly called, quote, state capitalism, end of quote, and which has haunted all subsequent communism and which has weighed like a nightmare on the brain of the living. Blame the Soviet nightmare for the following somewhat personal excursus. It is, of course, because of the obstinate persistence of such a nightmarish weight well into our present, that so many of those who consider themselves to be, quote-unquote, on the left, deem communism as a term and as a concept to be irredeemable and unpronounceable, or at any rate unserviceable, or at the very least impossible to invoke without the necessary and predictable ideological abjuration, conceptual convolutions, lexical contortions, and so on. It is a testament to the inevitable difficulties involved whenever trying even to just wrap one's lips around the word communism, that even a philosopher of the caliber of Etienne Balibar, for whom I have profound respect, is not exempt from having to perform linguistic conceptual somersaults when it comes to this matter. In a recent exchange with Antonio Negri, Balibar maintains that, due to its disastrous 20th century history, quote, communism today must be formulated not as an alternative to capitalism, but in terms of an alternative to the alternative as it was historically realized. End of quote. Though a bit cumbersome, stylistically and otherwise, this statement is certainly warranted and endorsable. And yet, I must add that there are those for whom, due to generational or other reasons, communism was never historically realized. That is, never had anything to do with historical actualizations of the state form, such as the USSR or Maoist China, or even with those semi-actualizations, such as the Italian Communist Party and the other various communist parties in the so-called West, regardless of whether or not they came to espouse the historical compromise, quote unquote, the third way, Euro-communism, or other such social democratic chimeras. This is not to deny either the existence of such actualizations and semi-actualizations, or the importance of understanding them and their versions of communism. This is simply to say that there are those for whom communism constituted a signifier whose immense, irresistible power was directly proportional to its emptiness, a signifier that never corresponded to any actual historical signified. I know I'm not alone when I say that growing up in the intensely politicized Italy of the 1970s, I started calling myself communist with the naive stubbornness and the quasi-animalistic mistrust towards adult projects and institutions, of which only an 11-year-old may be capable. I called myself communist with fierce defiance, yet without knowing exactly what I meant by that. And hence I read Marx and Engels' The Communist Manifesto in order to find out all about it. I called myself communist even more defiantly after reading the Communist Manifesto, precisely because, as I saw it, not only nothing I had read in that intoxicating book had been actualized anywhere, but also nobody seemed to have any sincere interest in actualizing it in the first place, including the many adult card-carrying members of the Communist Party that I knew so well since I had been practically raised by them. Never dismiss the infuriating obstinacy and monomaniacal resolve of an 11-year-old. My reasoning was very simple. The family had not been destroyed. Property still existed. Exploitation was alive and well. Class struggle raged unabated. Therefore, I called myself communist. In short, there are those for whom communism, for better or for worse, was politically determining and constituting precisely because it was perceived as never having been instituted. Our constitution as political beings occurred in the very act of calling ourselves communists in the first place, and in the absence of any type of communist project or institution with which we could possibly identify or even sympathize. For those, then, communism named the void of the historical situation. History degree 0. And it is on such a void that new forms of life may be built. It is across such a void that desire unfolds and unravels most intensely. For those, then, communism could only elicit an apologetic desire to experiment radically with life in its available historical forms, which, for many of us, meant, first of all, to struggle with, within, and against the former property relation, which is the family. Jacques Rancière's words, thus, strike a deep chord when he writes, quote, "The only communist legacy that is worth examining is the multiplicity of forms of experimentation of the capacity of anybody, yesterday and today. The only possible form of communist intelligence is the collective intelligence constructed in those experimentations." End of quote. This implies, among other things, that communism has an ancient history, one which certainly underwent specific redeterminations under the capitalist mode of production, and which well predates and has not always overlapped with the history of Marxism. And here the excursus, if not the nightmare, comes to an end. Still, why communism today? Does the common really need communism at this point in history? Lately, we have been hearing these questions with increasing frequency from a variety of quarters, as a significant number of thinkers, once again, have been formulating as well as answering them, though it should be noted that some of these thinkers had never stopped asking about and after communism. I'm referring, for example, to the dozens of books and scholarly articles returning to the question of communism that have been published within just the last 5 years, especially in the disciplinary field of political philosophy. The reasons for what constitutes nothing short than a communist revival are complex, and they certainly include the current and ongoing global financial crisis that started most immediately in 2008. To these highly welcome debates, I wish to add one simple point. The point here, for me, is not only to rescue and to reclaim communism as a term, as a philosophical concept, as a political project, from disgrace, from oblivion, or from both, though such a rescue would constitute already an important achievement, even from the standpoint of historical record and historical memory alone. The point is that myriad different and apparently unrelated political struggles around the world today find their common denominator precisely in the common. These are not only struggles to resist and to reverse the current and ongoing rampant expropriation and privatization of the common in all of its forms at the hand of neoliberal globalization. These are also struggles to experiment with new forms of the common and, as Gigi Rogero has argued, to institute the common, to create institutions of the common. Others, most recently Hart and Nagry in their book Commonwealth, as well as in the lecture delivered by Hart in this very room a couple of weeks ago, others have elaborated incisive, detailed accounts of such worldwide struggles, and I refer you to such admirable accounts. My point here is that communism owes its renewed and urgent relevance to the presence of such struggles rather than the other way around. It is for this reason above all, namely because of such struggles, that it is legitimate and indispensable to talk about communism today. This means also that communism is an uncompromisingly non-utopian project that is rooted in an analysis of the here and now. These are actually existing struggles. This is actually existing communism, truly quotidian, ordinary, common communism. From Marx onwards, the argument has been made too many times already that capitalism is its own great digger, that capitalism produces the conditions for its own destruction, that it itself paves the way to communism, and so on. And this is an argument that may elevate itself from the level of trite cliché only in those very rare cases in which it is reformulated in strictly non-teleological terms. Given how well capitalism learns from and thrives on its own intrinsic and structural contradictions, after all, I see no reason to rejoice in such contradictions. Given the multitude of past and present struggles, in which what is at stake is above all the common, however, I see no reason to surrender, to concede defeat, and to resign ourselves either. In any case, it is prudent here to follow Spinoza in believing that both despair and hope must be counted among the sad passions, which are to be discouraged, neutralized, and inverted at all costs. Neither hopeful nor despairing, the communism of which I speak is born out of an obstinate realism, out of an heretical empiricism, and is ultimately descriptive of a tendency rather than prescriptive of a predetermined goal. At the very least, communism may serve as a heuristic device for mapping, concatenating, and even integrating such ongoing struggles. That is, it may stand as the name of a constellation of struggles of the common. Stars precede a constellation, of course, but it is the name that brings the constellation into visibility and into being. Some things have not changed. Yesterday, as much as today, communism names a struggle against property, beyond value, and for the common. It names a desire at once ancient and modern for the materialization and incorporation of surplus, not in the forms of value, but in the forms of the common, a desire for a world valueless and common. Ultimately, neither names nor concepts are enough to give form to such a desire and hence to such a world. The name of communism and the concept of the common constitute at best common notions. As Spinoza argues, knowledge based on common notions, namely reason, rationality, is intrinsically adequate, yet too general, and is surpassed by another and higher type of knowledge. The latter always includes and builds on reason, always involves understanding the worlds and ourselves in it from the standpoint of synchronicity rather than diachrony alone, also involves thus an experience of eternity within the finite spatio-temporal limits of our modal existence, and, most importantly, gives rise to what he calls intellectual love of God. Elsewhere, I've argued that such a type of knowledge and such a love of God constitute nothing other than love of surplus, love of potentiality, love of the nothing that is, love degree zero. In short, love of that which cannot be measured, owned, or valued by anyone, love of that which everybody shares in common. Here I will point out simply that the politics of the common is nothing at all without such knowledge and such love. This politics doesn't need good names and effective concepts. That is, knowledge founded on common notions, knowledge of the common, rationality, and so on, yet cannot limit itself to them. It must also include and address itself to a realm of knowledge and to an experience of communication of the common we share, which cannot be understood or known within the limits of reason alone. Hence, the catastrophic failure of rational secularisms of all sorts nowadays. One could do worse, hence, than heed these words that come from a past at once recent yet impossibly distant, and that still resonate with unrealized potentials to this day. This is the French philosopher and novelist Maurice Blanchot, around the beginning of the Cold War, circa 1953. Quote, "Communication, such as it reveals itself in human relations, and such as it withdraws itself in the works that we still call works of art, perhaps does not indicate to us the horizon of a world free of deceptive relations, but helps us to challenge the authority that founds these relations, forcing us to reach a position from which it would be possible to have no part in values. The poetic work, the artistic work, if it speaks to us of something, speaks to us of what is outside any value, or what rejects all valuation, proclaims the exigency of the beginning again that loses and obscures itself as soon as it is satisfied in value." Nietzsche wanted to transmute all values, but this transvaluation seemed to leave the notion of value intact. It is undoubtedly the task of our age to move toward an affirmation that is entirely other, a difficult task, essentially risky. It is to this task that communism recalls us with a rigor that it itself often shirks, and it is also to this task that artistic experience recalls us in the realm that is proper to it. A remarkable coincidence. End of quote. And a remarkable political praxis is the one that produces, loves, and lives the common, not as the subject-object of value, but as a work of poiesis, as a work of art, as a difficult and even painful experimentation in which everything, life itself, is at risk and at stake. An affirmative biopolitics of the common.
So we have about half an hour left. Time for questions that you might have.
Yes. I could ask one. I'm an outsider to this discussion, but what do you mean by the word evaluation? I'm curious. You're using it in a way that I'm not used to hearing. Could you explain on that a little bit, please?
I didn't hear the main word.
The valuation. Could you describe a little bit by valuation? I'm not used to this dialogue, so I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that.
By valuation, I mean anything that is valued. That's those are Blanchot's. The valuation is Blanchot's word, but I simply mean something that is valued, something that has value, that is given value. Because nothing has value in and of itself. We give it to it. We produce value. That's what I mean by valuation. Actually, that's what he means by valuation. Now, there is a complex genealogy here in terms of the very concept of value because, well, we use it in many ways, economically, aesthetically, ethically, morally, and so on. However, if we look at the history of this concept and even of the term, all of it comes out of more or less at the same time in 18th century moral philosophy, and at first, the very concept of value is not differentiated between aesthetic and moral and ethical and so on. They actually are theorized pretty much in integration with each other, and it's only later that they split and seemingly achieve or mean different things. Now, again, I think it's quite clear they don't mean the different thing anymore. They all mean the same thing. Yes?
How would play exist in the communism that you're speaking of?
How would what?
Play?
Play. How would play exist? The realm of play, the realm of game. And how would it exist?
Kind of constituted play. Play that's outside of what's handed down in terms of handing someone a subjectivity and saying this is you now. The play that is generative. Would that exist?
It does. Let's put it this way. If it didn't, it certainly would not be communism that I'm talking about. Certainly, absolutely, yes. That's why I end with a quotation that is trying to make a connection between communism and what he very widely calls the artistic and aesthetic experience, which is very closely linked to play and to the role, the function that playing has for human beings. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
I know it's not the subject of your talk today, but I was hoping you could take the Q&A time a little bit to make the connection between this concept of commons and the one that is working on the logic of scarcity that refers to natural resources.
I can certainly say a few things about it. I say a few things because it's not that area or part of the common that I have delved most into, but clearly I did say that it exists, they're related to each other, they interact and so on. That other common, first of all, I don't think of it, just to make very clear, I use the word natural resources for lack of a better term, just to make ourselves understood, but I don't think of it at all as a natural common. It's just as cultural and historical as anything else. Why? There is nothing natural about a resource. Oil became a resource. Oil was stuff. It became a resource only when we realized that we could do something with it. Okay? So already there, the very idea that we can and need to use water, oil, people have argued that money should be thought of as a resource of that type too. That very idea is already fully cultural, fully historical idea. So they're both historical and cultural commons, these ones. Even though one may seem not to include the human. They are both completely natural. The human is part of nature. So for me, they're both natural and both completely cultural at the same time. So that's one first thing that I would say about that other common. That's how they're linked. This is one of the ways in which they're very essentially linked, even though they do function differently. The other thing has to do with the fact that what we are witnessing, we have been witnessing for a while, but we're witnessing even more rapidly now, is a rampant privatization of the common in both senses. Now, it seems to me that it's quite one thing to fight the privatization of, say, water, and to fight the privatization of language. Precisely because language multiplies and remultiplies itself. And water doesn't, unfortunately. People thought it did, but it doesn't do that. So that's why it has potentially political consequences for how we wage, say, a struggle for the common, or how we resist the privatization of the commons in its various determinations. Beyond that, I think I'll have to stop there. I mean, I know I have more thoughts, but they are more incoherent than what I can express. Thank you. And of course, then there's the commons, as in the historical commons. There's a long history in terms of land, and that's a whole, not a whole other story. It certainly is related to all the stories that I'm talking about, since it's crucial for the making of capital. There's a crucial chapter in the making of capital. Yeah.
In your discussion with Antonio Negri, at one point you point out how seldom he uses the word communism.
How seldom he uses the word
Yeah, I think he calls you a bean counter too.
He calls me what?
A bean counter.
Oh, God.
But my question is just, is there a gap between your thought and his? Or is he talking about something different, just not using, or something the same, not using the word communism?
Right. It's complicated. It's both of, it's a bit of both of those things, and let me explain. First of all, Negri has seldom, what I was pointing out was that in some very specific books that had just come out, he was not using the word communism to describe things that actually could be defined as communism, could be called communism. The book in question was Multitude, that he wrote with heart. Now, the point is that Negri has a long writing history. I mean, his first publications were in the 1950s. We have more than half a century of works. And this is somebody who wrote about communism aplenty throughout the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and so on. But suddenly, in these works, this word disappears, which is why I was questioning him about it. I think my reasoning, my theory here would be, though I don't think he agrees, my reasoning is that there was something strategic about not mentioning that word, because there are many problems with mentioning that word. For often enough, when you pronounce the word communism in certain environments, everything is white noise after that. Because everybody thinks they know what communism is, because we have had the Soviet Union, we have had Mao, we have had Cuba, we have had communism, and so we know what it was, and it was horrible in so many ways, and blah, blah. So there are good reasons for not using the word if you want to have a certain type of conversation. And hence, I think that was why they didn't use it in that book, even though their definition of radical democracy there comes pretty close to some of the things I'm talking about. So is there a gap between what I'm talking about and what, say, he and Michael Hart are talking about? Not really when it comes to this. Not that much, because it's a terminological choice, and it's a different choice. The concepts being rather similar. It's not that terminological choices are not important. I think words are very important. By training, I'm a literary critic. Okay, this is how I was trained, and hence I could never, say that words are not important or naming something. Names are extremely important. The way you name or call something is extremely important. And I think it is important to remember that there is a history of communism for which people fought. A history that includes the July Revolution of 1830 in France, that includes the Paris Commune, that includes Rosa Luxemburg, that includes a lot of things that I would certainly endorse. So, a lot of people died and fought for that word, and a lot of people were killed by it too. And for all those reasons, for both types of people, I think it's important to remind ourselves of that word and to keep on using it in whatever way. That's why I want to actually talk about it, rather than making it disappear, and basically express the same concept in a different way or in a different name. Then I have other differences with Hart and Negri and so on that are, I mean, Negri is, you know, generationally already, I mean, he is much older, is a teacher in many ways, I mean, for me. I mean, it was never literally my teacher, but that's how I certainly learned a tremendous amount of stuff from him and value a lot of what he has written. But we do have crucial differences, and one of them has to do not with what you were pointing to, but has to do more with the fact, for example, that I am very attached to theoretical discourses and practices such as psychoanalysis. Things that I still find very important. I find them very important because I think that thinking about and through sexual difference, sexuality, and so on, I mean, one can do completely away with talking with someone. It's not that someone wants to right or wrong, it's a question of having a dialogue and a conversation. It cannot be ignored, let me put it this way. He, Negri, would very happily ignore it, and I'm sure he would agree on that. That one, I assure you that is really with me right now. But I think there was a hand here, and then there was a hand there, and then another one here. But I think you were first.
Could you go into a little bit greater detail in terms of the problem of communicative capitalism? It seems to me that if I'm hearing you correctly, sort of in a similar line to Hart and Negri, you're noting that sort of the production of thought, language, and affect isn't what the issue is. The issue is that this is being equated to particular notions of value rather than the common. And what seems to me to be an interesting sort of antagonism there is that for Hart and Negri, value then is trying to be recuperated in a non-economic sense. So is that sort of where you're going with communicative capitalism? Is that thought, language, and affect are valued in terms of economic rather than more social currencies?
They are valued both economically and socially too. At this point, it's very difficult to extrapolate the two. I would hope, I would wish to do away with value altogether. I'm not interested in the concept of value or the term. I think it has brought, it has been extremely painful to the history, modern history, and so yeah, this is why I quote Blanchot, who, by the way, says, you know, Nietzsche was right. He wanted to transvaluate all values. This is take all values and turn them against themselves and make like show how it is that they actually meant the contrary of what they supposedly mean. However, Blanchot points out very rightly that operation, that philosophical operation that Nietzsche does for religion, for all sorts of things, that operation ultimately didn't work because it left the notion of value itself intact. Now, I want to do away with the notion of value. When I say that capitalism is the production of surplus value, when I say that capitalism is exploitation and exploitation is the production of surplus value, the problem for me in surplus value is not with surplus, it's with value. And I think that has to be kept in very clear in mind, and one must not make that confusion. I think one of the problems with the Soviet project was that that wasn't given a thought to. The differentiation was not made, and the relation between the two was not worked out. So, communicative capitalism. Let's go back to communicative capitalism. Well, first of all, it's not my term, though I realized only later that it had already been used, but that simply tells you that how much things circulate in common at this point. I mean, you know, one captures or senses things. While I was writing about communicative capitalism, it turns out, of course, that Jodie Dean is the one who coined that term, and then I've been in correspondence with her about her work and so on. Now, I said I use it differently than the way she uses it. I like her work very much, but she does not see anything redeemable in surplus, in what I'm calling surplus. Whereas I am saying precisely that if there is hope, it isn't that. Otherwise, her account of capitalism, I would endorse, but with that crucial difference, that all this excess and surplus and so on, she thinks it's very mystifying and ultimately impoverishing and diminishing. Yes, it is diminishing and impoverishing in so many ways, but I think that this is also the only thing we have to go by, is the fact that by our structure, we produce surplus. I think that was an end there.
Yes, a little while ago you mentioned that people, died for communism. They fought for it. They were executed for it. And I'm curious about your notion then of this universalism of the common as, wherein lies the motivation for, such a program, if it is a program. Historical communism was to help the worker, lose his chains, as it were. It helped African Americans regain equality and dignity. Those were some of the promises of communism that attracted people. What motivation does a universalism of the common, draw for people? What red flag do you dare to raise?
What?
What red, the expression, dare to pick up the red flag?
Oh, yes. Yes. What I would say is this. There's been a way of describing the world and how the world is shaping up nowadays with the term globalization. That seems to be a catch-all term. Many people mean different things by it, but globalization, global capital, globalization in any case, has come to stand for a certain type of interconnectivity that everybody on the planet now is enmeshed in. Which doesn't mean, of course, that everybody is enmeshed equally or in the same way. Far from it, in fact. I would, at the very least, support the idea that we do live in a world that is far more interconnected than ever. Interconnected in all so many different ways. Human beings are far more interconnected than ever. And yet, what I claim is that the way in which this interconnection has been produced, has been built, it's what has interconnected everybody is at the very same time that which has kept everybody separate and fighting against each other. By which I do mean capitalism. Capitalism gave us globalization, and it tied us all up together, precisely to the extent to which it also separates us from each other and makes us fight with each other. Now, that means, for me, that capitalism in its planetary, global, even universe aspiration, capitalism is a universalism. It is certainly at an ideological level, and it is also politically economically, tendentially universal. That's what it wants. It wants to spread it, as it were, wants to spread everywhere, interconnect everything. Now, since I come from the standpoint that I do find capitalism, well, here Marx, I think, was quite correct when he said basically that, well, this is the very worst and the very best thing that ever happened to humankind, is capitalism. Since I would agree with that statement, more or less, then I also want to find ways to fight this thing called capitalism, which has given us globalization and has these universalist aspirations. So, what I am saying is, at this point in time, if one wants to fight capitalism, if that's the political standpoint for which one comes, one needs universalist notions. One needs a universalism to combat this other universalism. Precisely at a time when capitalism is conventionally more universal than ever, we need to have, I think, as I put it, universal aspirations of our own. What does that mean in concrete ways? It means that we cannot shy away from saying that human beings must have something that can connect them in a way that is different from the way in which we are being connected now. That we have something in common that is not, in fact, what has produced what goes by the name of globalization. So, that's why I feel that we need universalism, or in any case, universal notions that can make us think of people as connected together. That's my motivation. The critique, the criticisms of universalisms, I'm very familiar with those criticisms and I agree with them, but the problem for me with those critiques is that they literally threw away the baby with the bathwater. They criticized universalism such as Eurocentrism, for example, but what was let go also was of a notion that human beings have something in common. That very notion is now unthinkable in several disciplinary domains that I can think of, and I would like to bring it back. It's a risky matter, however, because it risks, being re-essentialized and being used as an instrument of domination, like all universalisms have always been used so far that I know. But I think it's a necessary risk too.
How does that relate to your idea?
I think.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't know if.
Go ahead.
Direct follow-up. Go
No,
ahead.
no, go ahead.
If it's direct follow-up, yeah.
Oh, I was just wondering how that related to what you said about the essence, that we do not really have common essences.
Yes, all universalisms that I know of were based on a belief in the fact that human beings shared something essential in common, that were some common essences. And I don't think there's any such thing. But there are potentials. Now, potentials are not actual. This seems like almost like wordplay, but I think it is a crucial thing. These essences that were being talked about were identified as actual identities, as actually existing things. Potential means precisely not actual. Something that is potential does not exist. And yet, it's embedded and incorporated in bodies. I have the capacity to step down the stairs, but I'll do it, or maybe not, I don't know. There is a potential that may or may not be actualized. But a potential is precisely not present, yet embedded in a corporeality. So, the universalism I'm thinking of would have to be a universalism that addresses precisely this level of potentiality, not a level of essences, because that has always gotten us into trouble. Sorry,
That's actually a good lead-in, because my question then is perhaps best phrased about temporality, right? That potentiality is always a kind of current or future concept. So is there a path, is there a history? What's the relation of the universalisms of the common to our past?
Yes, that's a very important aspect of this whole matter. There is a history. There is a past and there is a history, and there are histories, in fact, and they're very important. And one way of thinking of that past, one possible way of thinking about it, one possible way of formulating it would be the following. When I speak, I am, as it were, mobilizing, channeling thousands and thousands and thousands of years of civilization. Every little word, every language that we have, these things, it's taken literally thousands and thousands of years of human history to achieve. All of that goes into the making of just a sentence. So that is a history in the past that is literally shooting through us, that makes us, produces us, has produced us. And I think we should be attentive to that and aware of that. precisely to counter any notions of individualism, whether spatially or temporally. This is temporal individualism that we are criticizing. There is no such thing as a self-made man in any way or respect in this, and that's what I'm saying. I am saying that what's most unique and singular about me is these common potentials that also tie me spatially and temporally across. That's why the common and the singular are dyads that go together for me, whereas identity and difference have been not used for very good political effect so far from this standpoint.
Maybe, yeah. Two more questions, I suppose, like Alex, and then look here.
I don't know. I don't know who was first. Ramones? No,
ladies.
You. Okay, go. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe misreading you, but one of the things I heard you say is that to some degree, to some degree, communism so far has been more successful as an analysis and a critique of capitalism, but has failed as when it becomes prescriptive.
No. I'm sorry if that is what I said or wrote, or in any case, I do not want to put that across. What I want to say, or what I said, and now I will have to look back, is that the communism I'm talking about is a communism that is rooted in an analysis of the here and now. Is rooted in what's going on right now in the world. Okay? And what I see around is many different kinds, very, very different kinds of political struggles surround the idea of the common, our fights for something in common, or to be in common. That's what I was saying, and that's actually exists in communism. I'm not talking about something, that's why it's a non-utopian project. I'm saying it's here. We just have to look at it, see it, understand it for what it is. I think it would be important to give it a name, and etc., etc., etc. Yeah, that's what I meant there.
Okay, I'll just.
I'd like to start by saying I think you were able to explain your idea of communism very well and try to avoid the social stigma of it. But where I have an issue is the fact that I feel like we very casually dismiss the ideas of capitalism and globalization, and that the sort of stigma you fear is associated with communism is the kind of stigma that we associate with capitalism. I think there's almost an assumption when we walk into this room that capitalism isn't the best of alternative ideas, and that's something that I'm going to disagree with you on.
Okay.
My experience with capitalism and trade along those lines is that it provides a very, very good basis to be an interacting with people. The majority of my family spent the last year in India, and the majority of their connections, the family, the people they grew to have as friends and get to know, was all through the basis of trade. Two incredibly different cultures combined based on ideas of capitalism. Things that people value differently being exchanged to create benefits on both sides. And I'm not saying necessarily that one of us is right or wrong, but I think if you're going to dismiss capitalism, if you're going to dismiss globalization, I'd like to see a very good explanation as to why it needs to be dismissed.
Sure. I can do that. Just let me write it down at the top, just a second. Change. You were talking about all right. Yeah. First, I would like to let me sing the praises of capitalism. Let's begin by saying that. And I'm not being ironic. I really do mean it when I find Marx's paradoxical, contradictory definition. I find it very intriguing and definitely worth thinking a lot about. He actually, and Engels too, really do talk about capitalism as the very best and the very worst thing that ever happened. Now, one could disagree on both points, of course. But I happen to agree on both points, by and large. Yeah. Now, this is also to say that there are plenty of things that are associated with capitalism and being produced within capitalism and so on and so forth that I do, in fact, think are good and I would rather have them not. Okay? For example, it took capitalism in many ways to destroy certain previous types of oppressive relations, whether economic or power relations, whether it's feudalism or the serf master bondage within a feudalist, within a feudal paradigm. Those were things that were destroyed by that. And yeah, those things were, it's a good thing they were destroyed. I certainly have no nostalgia with that. Now, that's something, I've said something good about capitalism negatively, as it were, ex negativo, but just by showing what it has destroyed. What can one say? There are plenty of other things. I mean, there are plenty of the life I live is fully within capital. It's not. This is the problem with any argument against capitalism is an argument against oneself, as I'm trying to make quite clear here. But it's always very difficult because it's also very difficult to certainly to enact it, let alone to think it. It is a struggle against oneself because we produce. This is what we are. What we produce. Why should one struggle against it? I think that's very. For me, it's very evident, and it has to do with exploitation. I can summarize it all in one word. It has rained misery on this planet like no other mode of production ever has. I can't see one in the history of mankind that has rained misery on the people of this planet so much and to such an extent. And hence, yeah, that's bad. And there are good things about it? Yes, there are. And that's the difficulty. Also, the difficulty is that, I believe, it's a system at this point in time that does not have any outside. And so it's not as if there is somewhere else that it's not capitalist. It's not somehow connected up with capitalist flows of sorts. The fact that capital brought us together and that we have met, I wouldn't be here. Let's begin from that. And I like being here. So, you know, the fact that people were brought together, the fact that it was what I was talking a moment ago in terms of global interconnectivity, there was something absolutely exhilarating and positive about that. But I also must say at what price it was paid. And it was paid at a very high price. Prices of genocide, slaughter, exploitation, and these things go on. It's not even a question of the far past. So that's what I can say. If it's a contradictory proposition, that's not only because maybe I am contradictory, but because it's in the nature of capitalism to be contradictory. It is a self-contradictory system. Hence the difficulty of grappling with it. Trade and exchange are not necessarily capitalist, by the way. And that's the very important thing to remember. There's always a capitalist potential to any type of trade and exchange, but trade and exchange are as pre-capitalist as you can get, millennia and back. And so I'm not, and certainly trade and exchange was extremely fruitful in bringing cultures together, again, for better or for worse. I mean, whatever. But trade and exchange in and of themselves, that's not capital.
I think we probably should end it on this, unless there's sort of one, because we're out of time, essentially. But was there any last question? Okay, then thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.